3,000 feet over the bay, the horizon slid off the windshield, and my brother-in-law screamed a sentence he had not once said to me in 10 years. "Claire, do something." Here is what was happening. A single-engine airplane was rolling its wings inside a wall of white that had no top, no bottom, no direction in it at all. In the left seat was Greg, my sister's husband. 300 hours of private flying and an unshakable belief that he understood the sky better than anyone breathing. Clipped to the sun visor in front of him were the mirrored aviator sunglasses he wore every time he wanted a room to look at him and see a pilot. In the back were my sister, my mother, and my 15-year-old nephew, all three of them gripping whatever their hands had found. In the right seat, beside the second set of controls, was me. My fountain pen was still in my fingers, the cap not yet on. Not one person on that airplane knew that the woman who had spent the whole morning quietly working a crossword had once logged more than 2,000 hours in the cockpit of a fighter jet. Not one of them knew that the hands folded so neatly in her lap had put airplanes down on the deck of a carrier in the dark, had talked frightened men all the way home in this exact voice. Least of all the man holding the yoke. The man who, for 10 years, had called me the autopilot. And in less than 90 seconds, a captain none of them would ever see was going to say my name over an open radio. The whole cabin would hear it. And Greg would hear, for the first time in his life, who I actually was. But before I tell you how a stranger came to say that name for my whole family to hear, do one small thing for me. Tap that like button and subscribe. Because what happened inside the next 90 seconds is something no one in that cabin saw coming. The altimeter was unwinding. 2,800 feet. 2,600. Below the cloud was water. Past that was a stretch of shoreline that, at this speed, would leave nothing to tell. I put the cap on the pen. I slid it into my breast pocket. And I put my left hand on the yoke. To understand why that moment weighed what it did, you have to go back to that morning. To what they thought they knew about me. And to everything they did not. My name is Claire Donnelly. To most of the world, I am a 43-year-old woman who consults for defense contractors, runs in the mornings, and gives no one a reason to look twice. To my family, I was a story they had finished telling a long time ago. The quiet sister. The daughter who left home for the military and came back with her shoulders set and a habit of saying nothing about herself. They had built a frame around me years ago, and they were comfortable inside it. A frame is a great deal easier than looking closely. That morning we had gathered at a small airfield on the coast. All of us. For the first time, everyone had been in one place since my father died spring 4. My mother had wanted us together. One weekend. Up the shoreline at an old inn my father used to love. Greg had turned it into something else. He had rented a Beechcraft Bonanza, a sleek single-engine airplane, and he was going to fly us up the coast himself. That was the entire meaning of the trip to him. Not my father. Not my mother sitting small in the back seat. The picture of Greg Hale stepping down out of a cockpit that was his, pulling off the mirrored sunglasses, letting the whole family see what kind of man he was. Here is a thing I have noticed about men like Greg. They fill a room with sound. They name everything. Take the middle of it. Close every silence before it can open. I do the opposite. I came early and walked a slow circle around the airplane out of an old habit, glancing at the landing gear, the wing, the pitot tube. Nobody had asked me to. There are parts of me that never fully switch off. Greg caught me standing near the wing and gave me the smile I had learned to carry for 10 years. "Relax, Claire," he said, loud enough for the whole family to hear. "I don't need a co-pilot. Especially not the autopilot." That was the joke. That was always the joke. Greg had decided, somewhere along the way, that military jets fly themselves. That a woman in a fighter was just a passenger the computers carried from one place to another. That the real flying, the stick and rudder flying, the flying that took a man, was the kind he did in his little rented Bonanza with his own 2 hands. So I was the autopilot. The sister-in-law who used to sit there while the machine did the work. He said it at dinners. He said it at holidays. He would land somewhere on a clear afternoon and turn around and tell me the autopilot could probably have managed that one too, and everyone at the table would laugh. My sister, Megan, laughed a half second after he did. She always did. 20 years of marriage had worn that into a reflex. But Megan was not the joke. Megan was the architecture underneath the joke, and it took me most of my life to let myself say that plainly. When I first came home from the service, I was not cold. I was quiet, and I was tired, and there were things I could not talk about. It was Megan who gave the family the words for what I was. She was the one they believed, because she was the steady one, the daughter who called on Sundays and remembered every birthday and never went anywhere strange. And what she told them, gently with what looked exactly like concern, was that I had been through things, that I was not really myself anymore, that it was kinder not to ask. She recast my silence as damage. And because it came from her, it set like concrete. I understood, eventually, why she needed it. To be the normal sister, the stable one, the daughter our mother could understand. She needed me to be the other thing. My smallness made her whole. It was jealousy wearing the face of worry, and it was the most patient work I have ever watched anyone do. Greg was only the voice. Greg was loud and easy to see. But every joke Greg told at that table was a line my sister had spent 2 decades writing. I will tell you who I am once, in the plainest words I have. I am Major Claire Donnelly, United States Marine Corps retired. In the fleet they called me something else. Grace. I flew the F-18 Hornet for 18 years. I flew through nights when the panel showed nothing but noise, and I brought broken airplanes back to the deck when the ocean was 40 feet under the belly in the dark. I stayed up in the sky past what the fuel allowed more times than I want to remember. In 18 years, I never once lost someone who was flying with me. But I did not tell that to people who had not been there. Not to neighbors. Not to clients. And certainly not to Greg. There had been a stretch, years ago, when I tried. I learned that for some people the truth about you is only a thing to bat back down to their own size. So I stopped. I filed all of it under a label I wrote for myself. Done. Over. No need to mention it. I nodded the way I always did, and I climbed up into the right seat. My right knee caught for a beat the way it does on damp mornings. The price of too many hard landings on a moving deck. Then I pulled out my fountain pen and opened the crossword. You might ask why. Why a person who had done the things I had done would let a man like Greg call her the autopilot and never say a word back. I had done the arithmetic once. The way you do a thing you did not mean to do. 10 years since I came home. Something close to 50 family dinners in that time. And at nearly every one of them, without fail, some version of the same joke. So that by a rough count I had been called the autopilot in front of the people I loved more than 200 times. 20 years my sister had laughed a half second after her husband. I had all the numbers. I had never once said a single one of them out loud. The name Grace I will keep until the end. Know only that I did not choose it, and that for years I thought it was a joke someone was playing on me. Greg started the engine. The propeller caught and steadied. He reached up and squared the mirrored sunglasses on the visor, careful so that he could see himself in them. I have thought about those sunglasses many times since. A man does not clip a mirror to a sun visor to watch the sky. He clips it there to have something that keeps telling him he is somebody. I bent over the crossword, wrote a word in clean ink, and settled in for a flight I expected only to watch. There is a thing about the sky that pilots with few hours never really understand, and it has killed better men than Greg. The sky does not care how confident you are. It only cares whether you can read it. Before we left, I had glanced at the weather printout on the wall of the little pilot lounge. Not for any reason. Just another habit that would not die. And what I read made a very old part of me tighten. A damp air mass was sliding in off the water. The ceiling was forecast to come down through the afternoon. Along the coast, a sea fog was forming, the kind that from above looks like a flat, beautiful quilt. So lovely it fools anyone who has never flown down into it. Out at the airplane I said it lightly. Greg, the ceiling's coming down. We could take the inland route. Stay off the shoreline. He didn't turn his head. I've flown this line 100 times, Claire. Look at that sky. Go do your crossword. And the sky was. in that exact moment. Beautiful. That was the trap. It was blue and wide at takeoff, and Greg looked at it and saw confirmation of everything he wanted to believe about himself. I looked at the same sky and saw a clock that had started to run. We took off into sunlight. For the first 20 minutes, everything was exactly as Greg had promised. He talked the whole time. He pointed out the instruments to Tyler and named half of them wrong. He told my mother about a time he had nearly made an emergency landing somewhere, a story I had heard in 3 versions over the years, each one a little more dangerous than the last. Megan nodded in all the right places. I finished a row of the crossword just as he reached the climax of the story, and I saw Tyler catch me calmly writing a word in ink while his father described almost dying, and press his lips together so he would not laugh. Then I began to see it. The horizon ahead was going soft. Not all at once. The sky rarely kills a person all at once. It does it slowly, giving you a dozen chances to turn around, and then it punishes you for missing each one. The shoreline ahead was disappearing under a low band of white. The ceiling I had warned about was pressing down. And Greg did the single worst thing available to him. He descended to stay under it, to keep the ground in sight, because the ground was the only thing he knew how to fly by. We dropped below the cloud, and now we were flying low, pinned between a ceiling coming down from above and gray water below, inside a gap that was closing from both sides at once. Pilots have a name for this. Scud running. It is one of the most common ways private pilots who fly by sight end up dead. It kills the confident ones. It kills the ones who are skilled enough to feel safe and not skilled enough to know where they are. I started counting the things Greg was not counting. The distance between the cloud and the water, shrinking by the minute. The speed of the fog climbing up the coast. The number of minutes we could keep flying at this altitude before the gap closed for good. That is how a cockpit tells you it is running out of options, by small numbers sliding the wrong way. Greg was talking about a restaurant at the far end of the flight, about how early we were going to get there. He filled the cabin with his voice, the way he always did. While outside the airplane, the sky quietly closed around us. "Greg," I said. This time I let a little of something else into my voice, the old register I had put away for years. "The ceiling is squeezing us. You need to turn back now, while you can still see the way out." He laughed, but there was a taut thread in it now. Almost through it. I can see clear sky ahead. You worry a lot, Claire, for someone who read gauges from the back seat her whole career. There was no clear sky ahead. There was a wall of white coming toward us, and a man who refused to believe his own eyes, because believing them meant admitting his sister-in-law had been right. In the back, my mother had gone silent. That was the first thing that truly frightened me. My mother is a person who fills every quiet with small talk, and now she was saying nothing, only looking out the window at the white coming toward her. Tyler had put his phone down. His face had gone pale. He looked at me through the gap between the seats, the question children ask with their eyes before they ask it out loud. Are we in trouble? I folded the crossword closed and set it down. I did not mark my place. Ahead, the wall of white touched the nose of the airplane. We went into the cloud, and the world disappeared. 1 second there was a shoreline, a stretch of water, something for the eye to hold. The next second there was nothing. No up, no down, no horizon. Only one even shade of white on every window, and inside that white, the human inner ear began to lie. This is the thing that nearly killed Greg, and he had no idea it was happening to him. When you lose the horizon, the body cannot stand the emptiness, so it invents one. The inner ear feeds the brain wrong information. You feel level while you are banking. You feel like you are climbing while you are diving. And your instincts, the ones that kept your ancestors alive for 1,000,000 years on solid ground, are now trying to kill you with all their certainty. They call it the leans. Your body knows one kind of force, gravity pulling straight down. But an airplane in a turn makes another kind of force. And your inner ear adds the two together and hands you a sense of straight down that is completely wrong. You can be banked 30 degrees and feel like you are sitting upright. You can be diving and feel like you are flying level. If you trust that feeling, if you fly by it, You tighten the very spiral that is killing you, 1 second at a time, until the ground comes up to meet you. That was exactly what Greg was doing. He was not a bad pilot. He was simply trusting a body built for solid ground, in a place where solid ground had stopped meaning anything. I watched it happen to him in real time. 2 hands crushing the yoke. His eyes hunting for a horizon that was no longer there. And then he began to haul the controls to one side, correcting for a bank that existed only in his inner ear, walking us into a turn he did not know he was making. The Bonanza began to roll. Then the nose dropped. This is how it starts. The spiral that pilots who fly by sight fall into when they enter cloud. The airplane banks. The nose drops. The speed builds. And the pilot, still trusting his inner ear, pulls back on the controls, which only tightens the turn and steepens the dive. The altimeter began to unwind. That was the first scream from the back seat. And that is the moment I told you about at the beginning. While Greg's instincts were doing their best to kill all of us, something very different was happening inside me. Everything slowed down. The noise moved off. My sister's scream, my mother's fast breathing, all of it pulled back to a place I could still hear but could no longer be touched by. Not because I am braver than anyone. It was only a reflex trained into me over years, until it stopped being a choice. The fear comes later. The work comes first. So I worked. I read the instruments. Bank 30 degrees and increasing. Nose 8 degrees down. Speed building. Altitude 2,800 feet and falling. I did not look outside. There was nothing outside. 18 years earlier, someone had taught me the first and most important lesson of flying on instruments. When your eyes and your inner ear lie to you, you trust the instruments. You trust them even when your whole body is screaming that they are wrong. You trust them with your life. Greg, I said. My voice was low and even. Let go of the yoke. Level the wings. Look at the attitude indicator. But he could not hear me. That is what fear does to a person. It seals their ears. His hands were still crushing the yoke, and now he was pulling back. The exact motion that was tightening the spiral, and the altimeter fell faster. 2,600 feet. 2,400. Behind me, Tyler had stopped screaming. He had gone silent the way children go silent when the fear passes the point where it can come out as sound. My mother was praying, very quietly, in words I could not make out. I noted all of it and set it aside, in the place where I put everything that will not help the next 30 seconds. I did the math fast, the calculation I had done 1,000 times, until it no longer felt like calculating. Rate of descent. Altitude remaining. The water somewhere under this cloud. And one thing came clear as everything else went blurred. If I waited for Greg to hear me, all of us would die. Not in 10 minutes. Not in 2. He had about 30 seconds before we hit the water, and he was using every one of them to get us there faster. There are moments in a life when everything narrows to a single decision, and the whole of who you are up to that instant turns out to have been preparation to make it. I reached across the cabin. I put my left hand on the yoke on my side, and I said 3 words, not loud, but in a voice that had once cut through the roar of a jet engine over the skies of 3 countries. Greg, let go. There is a thing nobody tells you about taking control from a person who is panicking. The hardest part is not the airplane. The hardest part is the person. Greg was still holding the yoke with all the strength of a man who believes that letting go means dying. I could not wrestle him for it. Not at this altitude. Not with the time we had left. If we fought each other, the airplane would beat us both. So I did not fight him. I did the thing 18 years had taught me about leading a human being through the worst moment of his life. I let my voice become the only thing in that cabin that was still steady. Greg, listen to me. I have the airplane with you. Loosen your hands. Just loosen them. There was something in the way I said it, a certainty that left no room to argue, and it got through the shell of his fear. His hands loosened. Not much, but enough. And in that moment, the airplane was mine. I leveled the wings first. That is always the first thing. You cannot fix anything else until the wings are level. I looked at the attitude indicator, the small artificial line that tells you where up is in a world that no longer has one, and I rolled the wings back to level, soft and even, trusting that line instead of the inner ear that was still shrieking that we were banked the other way. Then I arrested the dive. No jerk. Yanking the controls at that speed would break something or take the lift right off the wing, and either one would kill us. I pulled back smooth and firm, feeling the weight climb into my body as the nose crept up to the artificial horizon and stopped there. The altimeter slowed. Then it stopped falling. 1,900 feet. It settled at 1,900 feet. I held it there. I did not climb in a hurry, did not do anything sudden. An airplane just out of a dive should be handled like something fragile for a few seconds, until the speed and the altitude settle down. I read the whole panel again, one instrument at a time. In the scan I had run 1,000,000 times. Attitude. Altitude. Airspeed. Heading. Around again. Everything was where it needed to be. Only then did I let myself know that we had just not died. I heard my sister start to cry in the back, the kind of crying that comes after a body realizes it is still alive. I heard my mother whisper something, but I did not let myself feel any of it yet. We were still in the cloud, still with no real horizon. An airplane flying level inside cloud with no plan is only a crash arriving a little more slowly. I held the wings level on the instruments. I steadied the speed. And for the first time since we entered the cloud, I had a second to look past the nose. The fuel gauge. Enough, but not enough to go wandering around looking for a hole in the weather. We were somewhere over the coast, inside the sea fog I had warned about, and that fog now meant every nearby airport was drowning under the same white blanket. Landing by sight was impossible. There was only one way down. On instruments. On the gauges. On the radio. On someone on the ground guiding us through the white to a strip of runway we would not see until the last second. And to do that, I needed to talk to someone. I glanced at the radio panel. It was not the cockpit I had known. But the radios on every airplane follow the same logic, and I had been working radios since I was 23 years old. I found the frequency knob. I turned it to the emergency frequency, the one every airplane in the sky is listening to, the one you use only when nothing else matters anymore. I put my thumb on the transmit switch, and I saw Greg turn to look at me. There was no contempt left in his eyes, only a question he had not yet dared to say out loud, the one all of them would eventually ask. "Who are you?" I took a breath. Then I pressed transmit, and the voice that came out of me was not the voice of the woman who had spent the morning working a crossword. It was another voice, one that had slept inside me for 2 years, one that had once sent warnings and emergency codes across military frequencies under the skies of places I am not allowed to name. A voice that understood what a radio is for. A voice that had never once shaken under pressure, because in the world it had lived in for 18 years, pressure was just one more condition to be managed. Slowly, clearly, and completely calm, I spoke into the white. "Mayday, mayday, mayday. This is Bonanza 92 Lima. Single engine, 5 souls on board, in the clouds. No visual reference. I have the aircraft under control, wings level on instruments at 1,900 feet. I need vectors to the nearest instrument approach. Requesting priority handling." I let go of the switch. And inside the cabin, all of them heard me speak in a language they had never known I had. Then I waited for an answer in the white. The first voice that came back belonged to an air traffic controller, calm and professional, the way those people always are in the worst moments of a stranger's day. "Bonanza 92 Lima. Mayday acknowledged. Turn right heading 270. Radar is working to identify you. Maintain your present altitude if able." I turned right to 270, my eyes locked on the instruments, holding the wings level through the turn. 92 Lima, right to 270, holding 1,900. Then a second voice came onto the frequency. Not the controller. A man's voice, low and steady, the kind that gets shaped over years of saying important things into a microphone while the world turns upside down. I would learn later who he was. Captain Ray Whitfield. An airline captain, flying a jet full of passengers thousands of feet above us, listening to the emergency frequency the way good pilots always do. Before he wore an airline uniform, he had flown for the Navy. And there are things a former military pilot's ear catches at once, things no one else can hear. He heard the discipline in my voice. He heard the rhythm, the precision, the complete absence of fear in a situation that should have been full of it. He heard a person who was not trying to survive a crisis, but running one. "Center, let me relay for her." His voice came. Then he keyed up again, and he said something to the controller that the cabin did not understand. "Put everything else on hold. I'll take 9-2 Lima." It was a small thing. A captain of a full airliner asking to hand his own traffic to someone else, so he could carry a little single-engine airplane down through the fog. Nobody in my cabin knew what it meant. I did. It was the sound of one pilot recognizing another before he had any proof. Then he came back to me, slower now, as though he were listening to something underneath the words. 9-2 Lima. The way you're flying that airplane. Were you military? Say your call sign. I have to stop here for a moment. Because I know some of you watching this are remembering a moment in your own life. The one where someone finally saw who you really were after years of being taken for something smaller. If you have ever had a moment like that, tell me about it down in the comments. And tell me where in the world you are watching from. I read everyone. Because the next moment was the one that 10 years had been walking toward. I pressed transmit. And the answer came out level and plain. Affirmative. This is Grace. Major Claire Donnelly. Marine Corps, retired. EFA 18. I have 5 people to get on the ground. The radio went silent. Not static. Not a delay. A silence with weight in it. The kind that only happens when a person has just heard something that stops them cold. It lasted 4 seconds. If you have never listened to aviation radio, 4 seconds is a very, very long time. And in those 4 seconds, a small thing happened beside me. Greg's mirrored aviator sunglasses, the ones he had squared so carefully on the visor so he could see himself in them, slid off the edge as the nose shifted a degree. They fell to the cabin floor, between his feet, and lay there. He did not reach down to pick them up. He only looked at them. The man who had filled every room with sound for 10 years could not find a single word. Then Captain Whitfield's voice came back. And under its professional shell, something had changed. A kind of reverence. Grace. His voice on the call sign was different from every word before it. A beat. Say again. Grace. Affirmative, I said. Grace. Another beat. Ma'am. I know that call sign. Then, quieter, as if to himself. I heard that story years ago. And then, steady again, but with the thing still in it. Major, this is an honor. I am going to bring you down. Hold exactly what you have. You are doing it perfectly. And inside the airplane, over the sound of the engine and the white outside the windows, all of them heard. I did not turn around. I did not have time, and even if I had, I did not need to. I could feel it. I could feel Greg sitting motionless, the man who had spent 10 years telling the whole family I was the autopilot, now listening to a real captain, the exact kind of man he had ached his entire life to be seen as an equal by, call his sister-in-law Major and say it was an honor. I could feel my sister go still behind me. I could feel my mother. And I could feel Tyler. But I had no time for any of it. Under that white blanket a strip of runway was waiting, and I still had to find it. Whitfield, I said into the microphone. Give me heading and distance to the nearest approach. And give me the ceiling at the field. I am only going to get one shot at this. Flying an instrument approach through thick fog is one of the most precise things human beings ask of each other. You are flying an airplane down to a point you cannot see, relying entirely on a set of needles and a set of voices, and you have to make every small movement, every degree, every foot, match an invisible road in the air. Right up to the second you tear through the bottom of the cloud and, if you have done everything right, the runway is there in front of you exactly where it is supposed to be. Whitfield brought me in. The controller cleared the airspace. gave me priority, exactly as I had asked. They handed me an airport 12 miles out with an instrument approach, and they read me every number I needed. And I flew. I let the part of me take over that had never really left. Heading held exactly. Approach speed steady. The glide path. Catch it and ride it down. The invisible slope that leads to the runway. I lowered the landing gear. I set the flaps. I let the Bonanza sink down the glide path, 100 feet at a time, through the unchanging white, my hands making corrections so small no one in the cabin could see me move. And I thought, somewhere far off, of the word Greg had used for me for 10 years. The autopilot. There was no autopilot in that airplane. There was only a woman hand-flying 5 people down through a sky that a man could not read. The altimeter counted down, but this time it counted down the way I wanted it to. 1,200 feet. 1,000. 800. 92 Lima. You are on the glide path, on the center line. Whitfield's voice came, even as a heartbeat. Ceiling is reported around 400 feet. You will break out near the decision point. Just hold what you are doing. 400 feet is a very thin margin. If I broke out of the cloud and the runway was not exactly where it was supposed to be, I would not have the altitude or the time to fix it. This is the line where everything is decided. 600 feet. Still white. 500. Still white. I held the instruments. I did not look out hunting for the ground, because hunting for the ground too early is another way to die. I trusted the needles. I trusted them with all 5 lives on that airplane. 400 feet. And the white broke. It did not thin out. It broke all at once, like a curtain torn down, and below us, wet and gray, was a strip of runway, stretching out right in front of the nose, exactly where it was supposed to be, exactly where the needles had promised. No sunlight. Nothing bright. Only a length of concrete under a sky that had just stopped hiding it, the truth that had been there the whole time, waiting for the second I got close enough to see it. I heard Tyler make a sound. Half a laugh, half a sob. I put the Bonanza down. Not soft the way an airline captain does it with a whole clear sky to work in. I put it down firm and clean and correct. The kind of landing you make when the only thing that matters is getting everyone onto the ground in one piece. The gear touched the runway. The airplane rolled, slowed and stopped. For a moment, no one in the cabin said anything. Only the low idle of the engine, the drizzle ticking on the windshield, and the sound of 5 people breathing, all of them still alive. I reached over and shut down a few switches, old motions my hands made on their own. Then I pressed transmit one last time. Center, Whitfield. 92 Lima's on the ground safe. 5 souls on board, all well. I paused a beat. Thank you. Both of you. Whitfield's voice came back, and this time there was a smile in it. 92 Lima. The honor was mine. Grace. Fly safe. The honor was mine, I said. Then I set the microphone down. And only then. Only once 5 lives were safe on the ground and there was nothing left to fly, did I let myself turn around and look at my family. We taxied in and shut down, and for a long moment nobody moved. Then Greg unbuckled his belt with fingers that were shaking. He did not look at me. He looked down at the floor, where his mirrored sunglasses still lay. He bent down, picked them up, and held them in his hand without putting them on. When he finally turned to me, his face was the face of a man who was waiting. He was waiting for me to take what I was owed. 10 years of ridicule. 10 years of being made small in front of the whole family. He had just nearly killed my mother, my sister, my nephew, and himself. And he knew it, and now he was sitting there waiting for me to bring it all down on him. I had imagined this moment. For 10 years, there had been evenings when I built a version of it in my head, the version where I said every single thing I had never said. But sitting there, looking at a man who had just nearly killed his whole family and understood exactly that he had, I found nothing left in me that wanted to collect. So I did not bring anything down on him. I looked him in the eye, and I said it quietly, low enough for only him to hear. You let go when I told you to. Not everyone can do that. That is what saved all of us. That was all. That was the whole of what I said to him. And I watched it wreck him more completely than any anger I could have poured out. Because I had just handed him, in the worst moment of his life, the one thing he had never once handed me in 10 years. A place to stand. A little dignity to hold on to. He bowed his head, and I saw his shoulders shake, and I turned away to give him the only thing I still could, which was the mercy of not being watched. I think I had understood Greg for a long time without letting myself name it. A man does not clip a mirror to a sun visor to look at the sky. He clips it there to be reminded that he is someone. Greg had been afraid his whole life of being ordinary, of being no one anybody would remember, and every joke he threw at me was only a way to stand a little higher than that fear. The autopilot was never really about me. It was about a man terrified of being nothing, borrowing height from someone smaller. And now the smaller person had turned out to be the one who brought them all home, and there was no height left for him to borrow. My sister was another matter. Megan came forward from the back, and her face was wet, but not only from fear. There was something older in it, something closer to loss. For 20 years she had stood beside a man who mocked her sister, and she had laughed, because laughing was easier than looking. And now she was looking. She reached for my hand the way she used to reach when she wanted something managed. "Claire," she said. "Thank God. I always said you were." And she stopped. Because there was nothing true she could put after those 3 words. There was no version of "I always said" that survived the last 20 minutes. I watched her hear her own sentence die in the air between us. I did not finish it for her. I did not take her hand. I looked at my sister, who had spent 2 decades building the small, damaged version of me that made her whole. And for the first time in my life I let her sit inside the silence she had made for me. Then I turned back to the panel. My mother said nothing for a long while. She only held my hand in both of hers, the way mothers do when they realize they have nearly lost a child and, in the same breath, realize they never truly knew that child at all. Finally, she said, "I never understood what you did out there, Claire." And I said, "You didn't need to, Mom. I only ever needed you safe." I had never needed her to understand. I had only needed her to be alive. And then there was Tyler. The boy came forward, and he looked at me in a way no one in that family had ever looked at me. Not pity. Not contempt wrapped inside a joke. Something it took me a moment to name. Respect. "Aunt Claire," he said. "You're a fighter pilot." Not a question. "I was," I said. He shook his head slowly. "No," he said. "You still are." And I had to turn my face to the window for a moment, because that 15-year-old boy had just said, in 3 words, the thing it had taken me 2 years and a bank of sea fog to understand for myself. Here is what happened to each of them after that day. You know whether a moment was real by the marks it leaves on the people who passed through it. In the 3 years since that afternoon, Greg has not flown once. He sold the Bonanza 11 days later, for $19,000 less than he had put into it, and he did not argue the price. 300 hours of flight time, the number he used to say out loud at parties, and he never added another hour to it. It sits there still, frozen at 300, the way a clock stops at the moment of the crash. The mirrored sunglasses went with the airplane. I have never seen them on his face again. He grew quieter. He also grew kinder, not only to me, though he never told another joke at my expense as long as he lived. Kinder, in general. The way a person grows kinder when the whole picture they carried of themselves has collapsed, and someone let them survive it without grinding them into the ground. I think that was the real gift I gave him. Not forgiveness. A door to walk through with a little of his dignity still intact. My sister called twice that first month. I let the calls be what they were. I did not owe her a reconciliation, and I did not offer one, not out of anger, but because restraint is not the same as reconciliation, and I had finally learned the difference. For 20 years she had told the family one version of me. That winter, without one word of help from me, it came apart on its own. Tyler told a different version at the holiday table, plainly the way a boy tells a thing he saw with his own eyes. Greg's new silence told a third. And I watched 2 decades of patient, Careful work collapse across a single season while I said nothing at all. I never had to take anything from her. The truth did that by itself. It always does. There were relatives who had heard Greg's version for years, the version where I was the cold daughter who had left. None of them had ever heard the other one, because I never told it. After that day, they still did not hear it from me. But they heard it from Tyler at the Thanksgiving table, telling how his aunt had brought the whole family down out of the sky. And they heard it in Greg's new silence, and in the fact that my sister no longer told the old story either. The truth did not need me to carry it around. It found its own way, slowly, through the people who had been there. Captain Whitfield I never met. A few months later, a letter reached my house, passed through several hands. Inside were a few lines in his own writing. He said he had flown for 22 years and had never heard anyone work a situation the way I had that day, with a voice that steady. He said he had heard the story of that night years before, secondhand, the way you hear the stories that get passed from pilot to pilot. He said he had told what happened over the fog to the young pilots he trains. Not the technical part. The other part. The part about holding still while everything comes apart. He ended with a line I keep in a drawer to this day. Some titles never expire. And Tyler wants to fly now. Not to show off the way his father once showed off. Because that night he saw a quiet woman become steady as stone in the middle of a falling sky. And he wants to understand what a person is made of to become that. I am teaching him the basics. He is logging his first hours. He has good hands. What I am really teaching him has nothing to do with the cockpit. I am teaching him that when everyone around him is shouting, his job is to lower his voice. That when his eyes and his gut lie to him, he trusts what he can measure, not what he fears. He is too young to understand all of it, but he will. One day, in a moment of his own, he will. As for me, a file was opened somewhere a few months after that day, a record of what happened. I know it exists. I have never read it, and I have never asked to. I do not need anyone to confirm what I did. I know what I did. 5 people came home. That is the only record I need. I went back to my quiet life. I still consult. I still run in the mornings. I still work the crossword in ink, and no one who meets me at the grocery store or in a meeting could ever guess a thing. No one asks. And I never tell. I promised I would tell you about the name. Grace. They gave it to me years ago, after a night I am not allowed to tell all of, and never will. Know only that there was a pilot in trouble, a sky that does not forgive, and a decision every procedure called impossible. I brought him home. When we landed, one of the hardest men I have ever known, a man who had never praised anyone for anything, looked at me and said, "That thing you just did, that was pure grace." Grace. Mercy given to someone not because they demanded it, but because it was the right thing to do. For years I thought it was a joke, because I have never once thought of myself as gentle. It took me a long time to understand that the name was never about gentleness. It was about bringing people home. And, as it turned out, about looking at a man who had made you small for 10 years in the very moment he collapsed, and choosing not to grind him down any further. And about looking at the sister who built that smallness, and choosing not to destroy her, and choosing not to let her back in either. The door into that night stays closed. It will always stay closed. There are parts of a life that are not meant to be told, only carried. Now sometimes in the late afternoon, when the sky changes color and the air goes still, I hear training jets somewhere overhead. That sound is not like any other sound on earth. It gets into the chest and stays there. I stop whatever I am doing. I listen. And I smile. The quiet smile of a person to whom that sound means something that does not need explaining, and could not be explained to anyone who has never been up there. If you are watching this, and there is someone in your life who has framed you as something smaller than you truly are, let me leave you with this. You do not have to argue with them. You do not have to make them small to make yourself large. The best revenge is not making someone hurt. It is the moment they are forced to see the truth they denied, and finding that you owe them nothing but your own restraint. And restraint is not the same as reconciliation. You are allowed to choose not to destroy someone and still choose not to let them back in. You only have to keep being who you really are. Quietly, completely. Until the day life sets you in the right place at the right time. You do not need a witness. You do not need anyone to confirm it. When that day comes, the truth about you will stand up on its own. It always stands up. And if this reached something in you, send it to someone you know who is being seen as smaller than they really are. Sometimes all a person needs is to hear that their altitude is still there. I take the fountain pen out of my breast pocket. The same pen. The one I capped before I put my hand on the yoke at 3,000 feet. This is the postcard I am sending you. From a proper altitude. Where the sky is clear enough that you can finally see who you are. Signed, Grace.